And there we go. Never mind. I stand myself corrected. We have Fletcher Johnson on the left-hand side of your screen playing Rakdos Prowess, who we saw on camera, actually defeat Sean Gallagher. I don't know if you get a chance to take a look at that game number one that Fletcher played against Sean, but a masterclass in the Rakdos Prowess deck. And speaking of masterclass, on the right-hand side of your screen, Andrew Elenbogen. If anybody in the event was a lock to bring Phoenix, it was probably Elenbogen.
Yeah, and these are two very accomplished players. If you're newer to the NRG series, Fletcher Johnson played in our championship last year. Andrew Elenbogen, Pro Tour champion, and someone who played 2 years ago back in 2022 and made a top 4 finish there. So I'm excited to see what they do. As we are underway here, Andrew Elenbogen sleight of handed into making a land drop. Meanwhile, Fletcher led with Kamana face Kakuzan. Got to trigger up to turn 2 and see how we're going to maximize this here. As it looks like we do have a Heartfire hero coming down, sort of a standard and pioneer all-star in these aggro decks.
Right, exactly. A Hardfire Hero, just ever since that card was printed into Bloomburrow, just an absolute mainstay in multiple formats, like you mentioned, Standard and Pioneer. And what's also sick about it is it just works so well with pump spells, specifically instant speed, because you can trigger it on your turn and trigger it on your opponent's turn. And Fletcher has no shortage of pump spells. We are working with 4 copies of Infuriate, 4 Monstrous Rage, and it appears to be 2 Turn Inside Out. And what's interesting about this matchup is there's this sort of dynamic where Elenbogen's removal spells are damage-based, Fiery Impulse and Lightning Axe, and Fletcher has the ability to pump toughness with stuff like, Valiant Trigger, Monstrous Rage, Infuriate gives 2 toughness. So it kind of like, in this weird way, you kind of have to sequence your pump spells and, in a way around your opponent's kill spells. So it'd be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, you mentioned it there. And I love the fact that Infuriate seeing play +3/+2. All these other ones, they scry, they give some extra bonus. But it turns out that extra toughness matters a ton. If Elenbogen went to Fiery Impulse here and Fletcher Johnson had Infuriate, his creature would live, Andrew would be down a card, and we would be up a trigger of Valiant. So we see a passing of the turn there from Andrew. After freeing the Fae with Picklock Prankster, we found an op. We played a land and passed the turn. So Fletcher knows something has to be up. As Screaming Nemesis, a brand new card from Duskborn that's been having huge impacts in all the formats. We even saw some modern top 8s from it here coming down and attack all from Fletcher.
Yeah, this one is really interesting. There's actually only 1 copy in Fletcher's main deck, and I haven't really seen a ton of this card in the Rakdos Prowess deck. It seems like this is maybe more of a recent inclusion because it is a 3-mana card. The deck is relatively light on lands, wants to play a much lower curve, but it's exceptionally powerful in this matchup because we talked about how Elenbogen's removal spells are all damage-based. So that means if Elenbogen has to, dare I say it, Lightning Axe a Screaming Nemesis, you're not going to feel happy about that.
Yeah, and in fact, if Elenbogen is letting access Screaming Nemesis, we probably are in an unlosable spot,
Right.
So it's one of those weird spots where it's like, it feels good, but is awkward. Speaking of feeling good but awkward here, we do see the Fiery Impulse coming down on the Heartfire Hero. The little guy there still gets the 2 points across because when it dies, it does damage there. So Fletcher Johnson knocks Andrew Elenbogen down to 12. Andrew Elenbogen plays Riverglide Pathway, and it takes a moment to consider his options here with this Phoenix deck, which we talked about earlier. His team, System Magic, really innovated on the Phoenix deck here. Lots of players talked about Artist Talent maybe being a fine one of. They went with the full 4 and has fundamentally changed this deck.
Yeah, like you mentioned, this was kind of the breakout Phoenix deck of the regional championship in DC. And I remember seeing a tweet a little while ago with, stats of like win percentage of Phoenix decks with Artist Talent and win percentage of Phoenix decks without talent. And it was pretty drastic. The numbers, the Artist Talent versions just had such a higher win rate. And, it's I think at this point it's sort of become stock where most of the Phoenix that you see, maybe not the full 4, but usually 3 is about stock. But Elenbogen is sporting the full 4 copies. The flex spot here, we kind of have 1 Prophecythetic Memory, which also works phenomenally with the Artist Talent. Those turns where you're cycling a bunch of cards, triggering the talent, and profs can just kind of pop off.
Yep. During that turn, there was Andrew Elenbogen. One of the cards that got cut a bunch that used to be a mainstay was Ledger Shredder, but Andrew has 1 and found it here. We Fiery Impulse down the Screaming Nemesis, triggered our Connive, grew it by discarding that Artist Talent because in this spot, it's not really the type of card you want to have. And now Andrew has this 2/4, and this is one of the things, right, Devin, is when we cut Ledger Shredder from our deck, we gained a lot of speed, but we lost a little bit against decks like Rakdos Prowess here. So Andrew being able to find his one copy early is actually having massive effects here, as Fletcher now has to sometimes pull the trigger first, as Elenbogen's going to move right to block on this Emberheart Challenger, and a turn inside out is going to get cast.
Yeah, interesting spot here for Elenbogen because Fletcher did play the Challenger pre-combat. So in Elenbogen's spot, you know that you might be interested in not blocking because you expect Fletcher to have a pump spell, but you know that if you block, Fletcher is basically forced to cast a pump spell, which is going to give you that connive trigger. So Elenbogen's sort of, weighing the options of, well, I'd rather just have this shredder trigger to dig a little bit closer into my deck, try and find something, and the turn inside out is going to make the Challenger, I believe, into a 5/3, and sorry, 6/3, and the Ledger Shredder will be a 3/5. So that would be a trade, I believe, unless Fletcher maybe has another spell here.
Oh, and we're seeing Andrew
Ooh.
Elenbogen into the Flood Mob bounce it. That we still get the trigger from the Emberheart Challenger. We're gonna get into its Kamano, but now Andrew got his connive and relieved a little bit of damage and turned his pump spell into maybe kind of his bounce spell into sort of a real spell there, where normally in this kind of matchup it's fine, but not the greatest thing in the world.
Yeah, and that's just such a blowout because, I don't know if Elenbogen had the Floodmar, if he drew it off of the connive, but, if, just being able to force Fletcher to cast that pump spell and, maybe Elenbogen knowing the whole time is like, well, I got you covered no matter what you do. And yeah, Fletcher's kind of in a tough spot here, 2/2 facing down the 3/5 Ledger Shredder, has that etching of Kumano on chapter 1 with Elenbogen at 6. We looked to these red decks and see how much burn they have, but Fletcher, because we're playing a bunch of pump spells, doesn't really actually have a ton of burn outside of really just the 3 Callous Cell Swords, but kind of needs to pair that with a pump spell in order to close this game out.
Yep, we're seeing Andrew Elenbogen for a turn, go Artist Talent into Sleight of Hand, trigger the Artist Talent, rummage away, and then the connive happened, and now we're resolving the Sleight of Hand here to figure out what we can grab. We have 1 red mana up, no land play for turn, and you're seeing just why this Phoenix deck is so good. See so many of its cards able to sort of always kind of have the first copy of something that it needs, and that sort of consistency is so powerful here.
Ooh.
As Fletcher Johnson does pick up a Ramanov Ruins. We talked about this deck doesn't play burn spells, and I totally forgot about Ruins despite being in play. Yeah, it's one of the few things we have, and this I think also highlights why this Ledger Shredder was such a good draw from Elenbogen, right? This Shredder is kind of making it so we can't get across those last few points of damage without having to play a bunch of things, and now you're seeing Fletcher have to tank up on how am I going to navigate this turn.
Well, what's interesting about this too is that Elenbogen has gone through what appears to be almost half of his deck at this point, and basically there's no Phoenixes. So in order to play defense, Elenbogen kind of has to just hold back this one Ledger Shredder and can't really afford, he can't put any sort of pressure on Fletcher with a couple of Phoenixes. You imagine if there was 1 or 2 of those in play, maybe get Fletcher on a bit of a clock here. But now Fletcher just kind of has the ability with that second Raminap Ruins drawn, and go say play land for turn, fire off 1 end step. Next turn, fire off 1 end step. And I mean, that's going to put Andrew to 2. Now, there are only 2 copies of Ruins in Fletcher's deck, so it doesn't have the third one to be able to draw. But maybe with something like Sokinzon, you can, Sokinzon, send all 3, get in at least 2 damage. And it looks like that's what Fletcher's going to go for.
Yeah, I'm interested to see this in the main phase. It means he is attacking, right? Like Fletcher, somebody who wouldn't just main phase past this here. So we are going to see these tokens enter and then move to combat. Andrew is, I don't want to, dictate the plays. I assume it's going to block. Probably it's going to.
You sure about that?
Yeah, I'm willing to bet the farm on this one here. And this is, pretty interesting here. Fletcher is kind of like, hey, I want to be able to push some damage, and I have a lot of haste coming down. From hand, I can do a bunch of burn spells. This Kamano will flip. And yeah, you see Andrew be like, yeah, I'll block the big one.
And so very interesting sequencing here for Fletcher. So Fletcher basically had the option to either Ruins pass and sack a Ruins end of turn, or channel the Sokinzon while Andrew was, only had 1 mana up. And I actually kind of think this makes more sense because you are effectively forcing through 2 damage when Andrew has less mana untapped and less resources to work with, as opposed to, Ruins, untap Ruins, then Sokinzon is the third option. So you're almost effectively guaranteeing the 2 damage here. And then as long as you can survive 2 more turns, you have 2 Ruins in play.
Yeah, also Fletcher has 2 haste creatures in hand, right? So,
Yep.
he is going to, if he does the other one, the third line is I plot, I play the mouse, I attack, right? I still push two, I develop my mouse, and I kind of use all my mana a different way. But in that world, maybe Andrew thinks, hey, I've got to get a little lucky. Maybe, there's a bunch of pump spells and another land in hand, right? Maybe Andrew's hoping that what you're talking about is the line. And that lets Fletcher maybe get a little sneaky if he draws a pump spell off the top. As we are going to see Treasure Cruise get found off the Free the Fae. Andrew's going to resolve it. Like you said, we have not found a Arclight Phoenix yet, and we do have an artist talent trigger. We're tracking what the level on the talent is. That is something that matters. It can reduce the cost of something. It's not like some of the talents where like you never really upgrade it. So we are just noting that for the camera, and you're seeing Andrew decide if he actually wants to use artist talent or not. It is a May ability, and he does. He wants to discard this land. He feels like he's going to draw some more. Found an Arclight Phoenix on that there, and now we're going to resolve this Ledger Shredder trick. We're going to discard the Arclight Phoenix, and our Ledger Shredder grows again before Treasure Cruise is even resolved. And we picked up a Consider Free the Fae in one other card. We're going to have to see, does Andrew have the mana for it? And Lightning Axe was one of those cards, Devin.
That's a pretty good one. That can also, if a Phoenix was drawn off of the Cruise, you can discard that to the Lightning Axe. The other thing we want to, make sure we point out is that Etching of Kumano is going to flip next turn. That's going to be an additional haste creature in combination with the mouse and the Slickshot show off. So Fletcher is potentially representing a lot of burst damage out of nowhere, from next turn, and Elenbogen has to weigh. It's interesting too because Elenbogen sees the two ruins face up, right? And I don't know if we get the life totals updated. I think Andrew might be a 4. We can get confirmation from production. But with those two ruins face up on the battlefield, he knows that he's on the hook for at least 4 damage. So you kind of have to be like, okay, well, I need to try and, to get this game over with in the next couple of turns before I give Fletcher 2 turns with those ruins. But also, there's 4 power on the battlefield. Fletcher might have more creatures in hand. So it's very difficult spot for Andrew to navigate here. As we see, the life total is updated. So Andrew is at 4. This is gonna be a really interesting one.
Yeah, this is very tight spot here. As we're seeing Andrew actually playing a Shivan Reef, gonna cast Consider, gonna get that Rummage off with the artist talent here.
The Shivan Reef is so brutal here too, because now that you're at 3, you're also just dead to Spirit plus Ramunap Ruins, as opposed to 2 Spirits or 2 Spirits plus a Ramunap Ruins. So now Andrew even has to make more blockers here. So I didn't quite get a good look at how. I think it was 2 Phoenixes.
I think there's at least 1. It was a little quick with it, but
it looks like just 1.
Yeah, then maybe there's 1 in hand. I did see a red card. It might also just be some removal spell that was drawn. So we'll have to see here. And it looks like the Phoenix is coming back. Andrew Elenbogen did definitely have a Lightning Axe in hand. So we know that there is an answer for the Kamano. So Andrew's not dead as far as he knows, but I think if Fletcher pulls the trigger, he might have him.
Right. So you flip Kumano, 2 haste creatures. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 attackers. I guess 5 attackers with 2 blockers and a kill spell only has Andrew taking 2, right?
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, because we have the 1/1s. That's right. So tough spot here for Fletcher. Now, I guess, Fletcher also sees maybe I can just attack. Maybe I don't want to give anything. Oh, we drew the Callous Self-Sword.
Okay. Well, that's probably GG, because now you can just go haste creature, send everything. Andrew goes block Etching, block Mouse, kill Slickshot, takes 2, go to 1, and then just the Callous Sellsword on the Spirit 1/1 is lethal because Andrew will fall to 1.
Yeah, he can also just attack with everything. And if he knows Andrew has to pull the trigger, when Andrew does post combat, he just plays the Slickshot show off and flings that.
Yep.
And so that as well is like another line for lethal. This is a spot here where Fletcher does need to pull the trigger on it, and these spots can be really tough. But, someone of his caliber, it's less about do I have lethal and more I'm not screwing this up against Pro Tour champion Andrew Elenbogen, right? I didn't get the win last year. Steven Dykman won. I won it this year. And we're going to see how he's doing it. Like you said, though, all roads lead to Rome. I even came up with a bonus answer. We just have to start doing it and not have a moment of hesitation. I like this.
There's the Challenger and the Slickshot. Yeah, so even with a kill spell, you block the Etching and the Challenger. You kill the Slickshot, take 2, go to 1. And post-combat, the Sellsword should be lethal.
Yep. I like this too. Make Andrew Elenbogen think. Burn away. And we are going to see
little mental energy.
Yeah. Yep. We have to get this attack all. And yeah, Fletcher sees it. Now, Andrew, from Andrew's perspective, he's like, okay, I'm alive. As long as that card in hand isn't a pump spell, it's like another like Heartfire hero I can live, etc. And we're gonna take a moment here where we know that this is over, but
Andrew doesn't.
doesn't.
He has to
Yeah.
he has to go through all these permutations of like what Fletcher could have. I think
Mhm.
the conclusion that Andrew is going to come to is that he's dead to any spell regardless, because
Yep.
even if you go block block kill, you're still dead to any of the pump spells too. So I don't know if there's a 1 mana spell that Fletcher could have that Andrew could beat here. So most of I think everything would be lethal regardless, and I think that's the conclusion that Andrew's going to come to. Can't say, Mason. I did not. I can't say. I thought we would have Callous Sellsword targeting a spirit token for lethal on my bingo card, but here we are.
Yep. And we saw Fletcher set this up. And Andrew's like, you want to do anything before damage? And Fletcher's like, I think I'd like to kill you. And Andrew's like, all right, I'll cast the spell. Yeah. And he's saying, like, hey, post combat, I'm going to fling it at you. Yeah. And Andrew's like, oh, okay. Yeah. No, you're saying post combat. My bad. And I know I've been there before too. I know the card, but I'm just like, what's happening? It's the sorcery. And it's like, oh, you're not trying to slow roll me. Fletcher Johnson up a game. We're going to have to see what these players have in their sideboard because, everyone knew Izzet Phoenix was one of the two best decks in this format, if not the best one, right? There's a lot of talk about, like, has Artist Hound pushed deck too far? And like we said before, Andrew Elenbogen loves this deck. He talks about it in all his content on there with System Magic. And he basically, in my opinion, was face up like, I'm going to play Phoenix or some off-the-wall deck you could never metagame for. So you might as well metagame for Phoenix. We have other players in this field that love it as well, like Connor Mullally. But let's check out the sideboard and see what Andrew Elenbogen has because he has to build his deck to answer everyone else and the mirror. And in his sideboard, Devin, we have 3 Third Path Iconoclasts, 2 Annul, 2 Negate, 1 Anger of the Gods, 1 Beacon Bolt, 1 Brazen Borrower, 1 Fiery Impulse, 1 Mystical Dispute, 1 Prismari Command, another Prophetic Memory, and a Tormund script. What do you like and why?
So, we mentioned you mentioned rather, Phoenix being one of the 2 best decks in the format. Honestly, Fletcher is probably playing the second best deck or the second most expected deck in Rakdos Prowess. So you would have to assume that Andrew has a very solid plan here. Now, first and foremost, you want to go towards the kill spells. So Anger of the Gods, Fiery Impulse, those are slam dunks. Beacon Bolt is interesting where it is a kill spell, but it is also 3 mana and a sorcery, which not great against the pump spells and just the way that Fletcher's deck the axis that Fletcher's deck sort of operates on. Brazen Borrower can be some instant speed interaction. Specifically, bouncing is a little bit better than killing. As we mentioned, the pump spells good against the red base removal. So Borrower, Impulse, Anger. I'm not sure if you want to go towards something like Third Path Iconoclast because it lines up pretty poorly against Trample from Rage and Flying from Slickshot. So my guess is I think Andrew doesn't want to go towards those. So really just the kill spells, the Borrower, and I don't think really Andrew has a ton else here.
Yeah, reminder, this event is open deckless, so all our players know what they are playing against and what is available to them. So we might even see some weird things happen where, Andrew thinks some cards are going to happen from Fletcher. Speaking of which, let's check out Fletcher Johnson's sideboard real quick, as we have 4 Thoughtseize, 3 Fatal Push, 2 Obnixilis the Adversary, 2 more of those Screaming Nemesis, 1 Claim Fame, 1 Heartless Act, 1 Reckless Rage, and 1 Jegantha the Wellspring.
Yeah, so personally, I've always had this opinion, and maybe I'm in the minority on this. I've never been a huge fan of Thoughtseize against Phoenix. Their deck, the way that their deck operates, they just have basically an infinite number of cantrips, and whenever you Thoughtseize them, it feels like a lot of the time their hand is just like 2 copies of card A, 2 copies of card B, because their deck is just like 12 cantrips, 10 removal spells, and even if you take, say, the important card, it's like so easy for them to cantrip into another one. So I don't know if Fletcher wants to go towards Thoughtseize. Given that deck lists are face up, Fatal Push not going to be coming in here. Usually, or at least previously before Talon, Fatal Push was a card that these decks would want to go towards to kill something like Shredder, but now that we have faced up deck list, probably doesn't want to go towards those. Screaming Nemesis seems like a slam dunk, again, because we mentioned that most of Elenbogen's removal spells are damage based, and anytime you get to just trade one of those, you get the guaranteed damage in. So my guess is you probably want those. Claim to Fame seems a third copy of that seems pretty good in sort of these grindy matchups where you expect a lot of your creatures to die. And I think maybe that's it. You could maybe Obnixilis. I don't know how you feel about Obnixilis against Phoenix though.
Yeah, I think Obnixilis is an interesting one. I kind of like it in matchups where I think it's going to go long, which sometimes Phoenix does, but Phoenix really doesn't want it to go too long against you, right? Like they need to kind of end the game. Ideally, they use something like kind of profs plus a picklock prankster that's like a vigilance big creature that can engage in combat. So I think it's something that you can bring in and would make sense. I think I like it probably better on the play than the draw, just because you can maybe afford to tap out in that way. But it is a very powerful card when people are trying to use a bunch of interaction. So it wouldn't surprise me to see Fletcher Johnson maybe be like, hey, I'm going to, here on the draw, maybe slowly develop some stuff and then try maybe on turn 4 to play off Nixilis with a Heartfire hero and immediately, casualty that, get 2 walkers and hope to blank all your kill spells. It'd be sort of, an innovative way to do it, but something that you could see happen. And one of the things I love about Open Deck Lists is that happens. Speaking of things that I love, Devin, that is the NRG series here. And we have some events lined up for 2025. We already have those first 4 announced as our players are finishing up sideboarding really quickly here. Here are events for the upcoming year. We know the first one, that's what matters here. First and second, Chicagoland 2025. Can't wait to see it. The Showdown event, one of those will get you here, and then the team trial as well. Can't wait to see it happens there. Madison, Wisconsin, the 15th to the 16th. Once again, Showdown events are how you make it to this championship. So you win that event, you're going to be here next year where we can commentate you taking it down potentially. Then May 10th and 11th in Chicagoland, Illinois. Once again, the Showdown and the trial. All events for this when it comes to format-wise will be up very soon, by the way. And then the 28th and the 29th of June, we're going to be in Indianapolis for the Showdown 10K. And then the team Showdown, Devin, on Sunday. That one's pretty close to me. So, if Norm has enough people in the booth, I might need to, I've done a lot of this champ stuff, but I just haven't won one yet. And so I'm thinking maybe I'll do that one. I'll see you all there in Indianapolis, June 28th and the 29th. But let's go down to our future match area as our players are finishing shuffling up.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see how these players sideboarded. We mentioned Elenbogen has a couple of cards, but there's some interesting ones like do the third path iconoclast come in? And then for Fletcher's side of things, do the Opnics Liskas come in? So it'll be interesting to see how these players, and you mentioned deck lists are face up, and that is certainly a part of this where, if you expect your opponent to zig and they decide to zag, does that change your sideboarding plans? And there's a lot of sort of different levels that you can be on in an open deck list event, especially with sort of these alternate threats or ways to alter your deck's game plan in post board games. I think overall this matchup is relatively pretty close. It was what's interesting about the game one is that Andrew just didn't really find any Phoenixes. And I feel like if Phoenixes were found, maybe he would have had and more opportunities to close that game out before Fletcher had that lethal turn.
Yeah, I mean, even just a turn sooner, right? We saw in that last turn, Andrew had to discard Prophetic Memory, which was his best way to kind of steal the game because he had to sort of find another thing, right? Where if just even one turn sooner, we're up 1 life from the Sokazen play if it kind of goes that same way, right? And then suddenly, well, that fling isn't lethal, and maybe Andrew can draw enough cards to combo kill back. I'm interested in what the players are talking about. My guess is they're probably talking about Andrew Elenbogen's stream system magic with his good friend Greg and Candles, but it could be anything. Who knows?
I thought they were talking about their lunch.
That's true. What do you think Fletcher Johnson gets for lunch? What do you think his go-to is?
I'm gonna say a grilled chicken Caesar salad.
See, I was thinking Caesar salad, so I like where your head's at. A little panaz. Andrew, it's got to be something with good value. I just don't know what the best Andrew thing is. He's a big food fan. I know that. I've had some dinners with him where one time he ordered something, and it's actually the first time I met Andrew. He ordered something, had a bite, and was like, I don't actually like this. Can I order this instead? And made a different order to the place. So Andrew's someone who I know loves value, but also loves a good meal. So I'm curious to know what he would get. As we are keeping 7 here from Fletcher, it seems Andrew's on a mulligan to 6, figuring out if he wants to keep or go down to 5. And you can see there from Andrew,
he's agonizing.
This hand's risky. I can't quite make it out, but he's going to go to 5 and, a deck with as many cantrips and then big card draw engines like Treasure Cruise. You can afford to do this, but it's definitely not free.
Yeah, Phoenix is arguably, maybe not arguably, Phoenix probably is the single deck in the format that mulligans the best because you just have, as I mentioned, a lot of your cards do the same thing. You have 10 to 12 cantrips, 10 to 12 removal spells, and very few specific cards that you want. Like Cruise in your opening hand is maybe not ideal. You'd rather just have imagine a Elenbogen just most of a hand of 2 lands and 3 cantrips, or even 1 land and 4 cantrips. Like that hand's totally fine. You can, depending on how the game progresses, and you can use the cantrips to kind of fix your draws. So Phoenix does mulligan a lot better than most decks in the format.
Yep.
I was thinking, you said value, so I wonder if Elenbogen would be a Little Caesars guy.
No, the food isn't good enough. It's
Well,
fine.
it's pretty bad, but
Yeah, well, so it's serviceable. That's my stance on it. But I just think that per the reordering food thing, the part of the story, I feel like
okay,
Andrew would sooner go to some local mom and pop place that has a good deal.
I see.
Like hey, we're we're in Chicago, we can do it. Anyways, we're gonna see land go from both players along with Kamana faces Kakuzan as Fletcher Johnson ticks up to 2 and decides what creature am I gonna play and grow. It's a really interesting decision here as we are gonna see him sort of line up Monastery Swift Spear first. That's a great one to Fiery Impulse and Torch the Tower, 2 removal spells Andrew has as it enters as a 2/3. No chance to respond here. As does Fletcher maybe have a 1-lander? Oh no, there is a second land, but it's one of excuse me, Blood Crypt. It looked like the
Blood
Restless Vents
Crypt.
from Standard. I thought it
Yeah,
was a tap
they
land. I was
they
like,
do
he's
kind of
playing
look
Vents.
similar. No, there's
Yeah.
no vents. No vents here. What's interesting about this, you mentioned the kill spells. Even with something like a lightning axe, right? The Swiss Spear currently has 3 toughness. If Fletcher Johnson had Infuriate, that would give +2 toughness to make it 5. The Prowess trigger would get the 6. So Andrew, with the lightning axe, still would not be able to kill that monster Swiss Spear if Fletcher did have an Infuriate. And interesting, you see Fletcher cast the Swiss Spear and passed the turn and went to pick up his creatures, assuming that Elenbogen had the anger, but thankfully for Fletcher, did not occur.
Yep. And you kind of see it here. Fletcher's hand is kind of creature heavy too, so it's only going to get worse if he has the anger. It's one of those things where he's happy Andrew doesn't have it, but also it's kind of getting worse for him every turn unless he kills Andrew first. As we are going to see another Monastery Spear for a different art come down, and you're going to see Andrew do a little math, figure out what's going to happen here. Currently, he's taking 6. He says no effects. Fletcher says sounds good to me.
Yeah, there's that stare down where it's like, okay, I pass priority. I pass priority. Blockers, blockers, damage, and it's
Yep.
like neither player wants to make the first move. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense for Fletcher not to make a move because he's already far ahead on the board. Doesn't really have to do anything. Andrew's the one who has to commit spells to the stack to sort of answer what Fletcher has going on. And Fletcher's like, you didn't have the anger the first turn. You didn't have it the last turn. You definitely won't draw it at this point. So Fletcher's just, committing everything. I couldn't tell if Fletcher had a pump spell in hand.
He does. He has a monstrous rage, which is I actually really
Okay.
like this play, Devin, because now you just say nothing. Fletcher says
Right.
nothing. Take 8, and even if Andrew draws anger, we just
It saved 2
pump
creatures. Yep.
exactly, and we have lethal in hand. So Andrew Ellenbogen in a tough spot here. This mulligan to 5 has not worked out well for him so far, but we do have a Free the Fae. We found a Fiery Impulse, a Brazen Borrower, and a Consider all his options. And you see Andrew, he's picking up. He knows he's lost. Congratulations to Fletcher Johnson moving on to 3-2. Not over for Andrew Ellenbogen yet. Our tournament is a little unique. You're going to play against all the different competitors because this is an invitational style event. And that's what you're also noticing. We're featuring 2-2. We've pre-picked all our feature matches so we can get everyone on camera there. So both players still live for day 2 and for that Pro Tour qualification, which, Andrew already has one. So he kind of playing the villain here, maybe trying to get 2 a little greedy there, but we love to see it either way.
Yeah, you mentioned the interesting sort of structure for our event. The way that it works is that players who accumulate 8 wins are automatically qualified for the top 8, and players who accumulate 6 losses are eliminated from the event. So basically, you got to get to 8 before you lose 6. And we'll have to see exactly who we got. I'm gonna take a look at standings here. I don't know if we have standings available for you guys at home, but if we have, we can get that on the screen. But we do have an interesting backup feature match here for you, where that Orzhov Demons deck that we saw on our Pioneer metagame breakdown perhaps might be in our feature match area this round.
Yeah, I think we have it. It's a little bit of a spicy brew from some of our competitors. They work together. It looks like they really, kind of tried to metagame what's going on with sort of the metagame at large and, is playing some cool cards there. And it looks like the backup match is ready. So let's head on down to it and see this deck in action. On your left, you're going to see Bob Culp playing Rakdos Prowess. On your right, Garrick Alfred with Orzhov midrange.
Yeah, I wanted to mention. I don't know if the folks at home are looking at the deck lists on the Energy Series page. Garrick's deck list is labeled as Gruul Prowess. I can assure you there are no Gruul lands or Gruul cards in Garrick's deck. This is just Orzhov Demons, where Garrick is deciding to play 4 copies of Blade of the Oni. That's sort of this interesting new tech that I think first appeared in the regional championship in DC in sort of the Rakdos Demons deck, where because Unholy Annex is such a powerful card, you kind of wanted to find a reasonable 2-mana demon to curve into that. And, it's a 3/1 for 2 mana, not the most impressive card, but Menace early on, a little hard to block. And just that curve of Blade into Annex puts so much pressure on your opponent.
Yeah, and in a matchup like this makes Annex not as bad a card, right? You play a
Yep.
3/1, you could potentially block, then maybe don't have removal spell, right? A lot of pump spells. Suddenly you're draining, which means you're gaining, right? And that might even give you time to get to another one. As we are going to see here, turn 1-2 from Bob, which is play one drops, hit you. Garrick went tap land, tap land. And we're just seeing Bob do the same thing that we saw from Fletcher last round. Hey, I'm gonna just sort of attack, no use of my mana, I'm down to hit you. And then I'm gonna pick up Giganta. End of turn, Garrick here, our player of the year, is gonna fatal push down the Heartfire Hero and take one from it, and should be dropped, I believe, to 14 here. As we're going to see another Godless Shrine. Love that art on the Godless Shrine. As
Yeah,
we're
and
going to its turn.
Bob playing the prowess deck, very similar to what Fletcher was on. I believe it might even be the same list, maybe a couple of cards different in the sideboard, but also has, still has the one Screaming Nemesis, the four Infuriate, the four Monstrous Rage, two Claim to Fame, and very, very similar to what we saw last match. And yeah, Bob's hand looks like there's an Infuriate there. I think I saw Monstrous Rage, got a Manifold Mouse that we're kicking. Bob seems to be firing on all cylinders here. And, you want to take a look at what the black deck has to offer here in terms of kill spells. Garrick's got four Fatal Push, one Go for the Throat, one Heartless Act, and an interesting card here, which is, I think, maybe one of the bigger reasons to play white, four copies of Vanishing Verse. And what I like about that card in this particular matchup is specifically Heartfire Hero triggers when it goes to the graveyard. But if you have a card that exiles the hero, you don't actually take any damage from it.
Yeah, I have to agree. We saw a go for third on the Heartfire Hero after the Manifold Mouse was off-springed before we got the trigger on that. Then we just saw Monstrous Spear attack. Yep, and Garrick is down to 12, and we have a bunch of pump spells in hand. And Devin, we have two different double striking mouses if we want it. We could give Trample as well, be a little weird with no creatures on board, but with two different +3 pump spells in hand, Garrick's life total is a lot lower than it looks.
Yeah, I think Bob, with two pump spells in hand, actually just has guaranteed lethal through a fatal push, right? Because you go double strike both, attack with everything, pump one on each. They're both 4 power double strikers with the Swiss Spear is 3. Garrett kills one of them. That's still 11 damage coming through.
Yeah, and it looks like Bob has decided not to. It's just going to play land Gigantha, get the 5/5 down. This might also be a situation where sometimes, especially for these time shifted matches, our life totals get a little off. It might just be a situation where Garrick has one more life than we're talking about here. But even with that, this Gigantha is a massive body, and this is the spot where I think Gigantha's at its best. Pioneer, you just sometimes flood out a little bit, and the 5/5 is very real, especially in your pump spell deck. And the ones that give trample. As we're seeing Garrick try to figure out what am I going to do, because Devin, this Annex is also ticking down and making us lose life. We can make a 6/6 demon, but we're just dead on board if there's any pump spell. And yeah, we're moving the dice and we're putting on 6 here while we get the actual demon token. But that is going to put Garrick up to 7 and draw a card, assuming our left totals here are correct. And like we talked about before, we had lethal last turn. There's mana tapped out now. It's going to be game over here for Garrick as long as Bob decides to cast the card. But maybe he wants a little camera time.
It is possible we maybe misunderstood what Bob had in hand. Now there's Infuriate and Rage. So yeah, Bob's going to go with an Etching here. That's going to put Garrick down to 5. And yeah, double strike, block Giganta. I believe that is still taking 5, even without a pump spell. So that should be good enough here. And
yeah, Garrick is at 7 due to the Annex draining with that demon dice we had going on. Looks like we had a devil going on there, but that's going to do the job there. So Bob up a game, showing why this Rakdos prowess deck was one of the most feared decks going into the RC season, especially for us here in the United States with DC. A lot of players had a lot of anxiety about that in blue-white, and this deck has really stood the test of time. Speaking of standing the test of time, let's see how this new deck to the format, Orzhov Midrange, kind of can hold up with its sideboard, because Garrick's somebody here who's coming in playing this deck and taking a big risk. And in our sideboard, we have 3 Rest in Peace, 2 Archfiend of the Draws, 2 Extinction Events, 2 Fracture, 2 Liliana of the Veil, 2 Pest Control. The 4th Duress is here on the sideboard with only 1 there, and the Path to Peril. Devin, obviously, this is sort of, a brew, like we talked about, sort of potentially a new player here in Pioneer. What do you like against the Rakdos deck and why?
So before we go to the sideboard, I just wanted to highlight real quick that Garrick is featuring no copies of Archfiend of the Dross in the main deck. That's usually a card you have frequently seen in these demon decks, really just leaning on Blade of the Oni and Mutavault to kind of get that online. But as far as the sideboard is concerned, you think to look at a lot like when you look at a sideboard like this, you kind of say, okay, what are the removal spells? What are the sweepers? So Garrick has 2 Extinction Event and 2 Pest Control. Those seem to be slam dunks, along with the 1 copy of Path of Peril. So those 5 probably coming in. Not sure if there's enough targets for Fracture, likely not. Liliana seems a little bit slow. Archfiend, maybe, because it's like a sticky threat that gains you, or gives you a demon for Unholy Annex. It all kind of depends on, what Garrick wants to cut. Presumably the Thoughtseize has come out. Maybe some number of Blade of the Onis come out. Maybe Elenda's too slow, doesn't line up that well against pump spells. But yeah, Garrick has, like I said, looks like the Extinction Events, the Pest Controls, and the Path of Peril seem to be the slam dunks.
Awesome. Well, let's check out this Rakdos Prowess deck from Bob and what we could potentially have going on here in our sideboard. I think it's pretty similar, like you had mentioned before, to the one we saw a second ago from Fletcher Johnson. As we pull it up on screen, it has 4 Thoughtseize, 2 Claim Fame, 2 Feed the Swarm, 2 Hazoret, 2 Screaming Nemesis, a Fatal Push, and a Reckless Rage. So while our main deck is pretty similar, we're having a bit more Claim to Fame in the main and another one in the sideboard and having some of these extra cards. Do any of these line up well to you at a glance? Because obviously one of the advantages we have going on here for Garrick is no one's ready for your Orzhov mid-range deck. This is a, teched out deck for this event. What might you do here this first time playing against it?
Yeah, and you mentioned, maybe you're not used to playing against the Orzhov mid-range deck. You probably can use at least a decent number of the principles that, like, if you've tested a bunch against the Rakdos Demons deck, you can probably transfer a lot of that into, the post-boarding of that matchup. So stuff like Thoughtseize to take their sweepers could be interesting. The one thing I will mention specifically against Garrick's deck, because he is playing Orzhov and the 4 Vanishing Verses, Hazoret, a card that's usually good against Rakdos, I don't know if you even want it against those 4 verses, Mason.
Yeah, I don't know either. We'll have to see how this wants to play out here. I wish we had Obnixilis, I know that card would be good here, but we decided to play Hazoret, and the Vanishing Verse is really paying off against Hazoret, like you mentioned. But our game 2 is ready. Let's head on down to the feature match area and see, can our player of the year, Garrick, do it here? I kind of thought Garrick might be on the Azorius Humans deck. We saw Garrick play it in our last Pioneer event of the year and has been doing very well on Magic Online, but decided to take this little bit of a chance here with the Brew, and I really like it. Sort of saying like, hey, I'm going to shoot for the fences when it comes to this. And when you have a deck like this, when we get to our top 8, not to get ahead of ourselves, this can be something that really skews it, as we do have a unique top 8 format that we'll get into tomorrow. But meanwhile, in this game, we had a tap line from Garrick into Monastery Swift Spear. Garrick's going to play Thoughtseize here. Might surprise people, but makes sense when you think about the Rakdos Prowess deck as a combo deck. In the hand, though, we have 2 Heartfire Heroes, 1 Slickshot Show Off, 1 Sulphurous Pit, Claim Fame, and Feed the Swarm. It looks like that one came in here. Devin, what are you thinking about while Garrick's doing this?
I think if you're Garrick, you kind of have to take the Claim to Fame, because if you take any of the creatures, Bob can just use the Claim to Fame to sort of put that creature into play. So if you take a creature, you're almost just putting it into play for Bob. And then Bob still has the Claim to Fame as the backup. Feed the Swarm could be interesting if your plan is Annex, but I think Garrick is going to lean towards taking the Claim to Fame, and that's maybe what he's thinking about doing.
It looks like he's thinking about the Slick Shot, which I think is because he has a Fatal Push in hand, Devin. So okay. I think he's thinking, if I take this Slick Shot, Bob, if he doesn't think about it, will obviously spend 1 mana on the card he normally spends 2 on, right? But if I do it, will Bob just strangle my mana like we saw in game 1? And so we're going to see what he goes for. He decides to take the Slick Shot Show Off, has a black land, and passes the turn.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, with Fatal Push, this does make a little bit more sense. And what's interesting there is if you're thinking about taking a creature, right, you could decide between the Slick Shot or the Heartfire Hero. But because Bob has 2 Heartfire Heroes in hand, doesn't really make sense to take one of those. So if maybe Bob's turn, Bob's like, okay, well, I have a pretty clean turn here. I could just get back the Slick Shot play and then play a Heartfire Hero. Well, Garrick has a good target for Fatal Push now. Or maybe even Garrick has one of those sweepers in hand too. Looks like that's not the case. See Fatal Push. I think I saw Vanishing Verse, an Unholy Annex, might have been a 3rd land. I couldn't quite get a good look at the rest of what Garrick is working with, though.
Yep, and Bob picked up the 3rd Heartfire Hero. So you're going to see he decides to say, like, hey, call. I'm going to bring back this Slick-Shot Show Off, see how it goes. It gets Fatal Pushed, pushes 1 damage against Garrick, and then takes a point, plays the Heartfire Hero, and sort of is just on Heartfire Heroes and a removal spell. Meanwhile, Garrick has a Mutable in hand and an Annex. The board isn't totally stabilized. Looks like he's maybe wanting to ask a judge question on how an interaction might work. But, Bob doesn't have a ton of pressure right now, but does have the Fame side of Claim Fame, I guess. So if you draw a land from Bob, you can play another Heartfire Hero, fame it up, and push a bunch, get a Valiant trigger. So we're have to see how Garrick wants to play here. Looks like it was a situation of getting Oracle text on a card to make sure we knew
Ooh,
exactly how it works. Is Liliana the Veil is going to come down and
all right.
immediately get minus. Bob is going to sacrifice the Heartfire Hero and deal 1 to Garrick.
Yeah, and I think if you're Bob, you're kind of okay with this because then you can just, Monastery Swift Spirit to clear out the Liliana. You have a hero in hand. It looks like he picked up, I think it might have been a Nemesis for turn. So Liliana's going to get cleared. And yeah, this is actually picked up a third Hardfire hero as well. So Bob is just kind of firing on all cylinders here. And, Garrick does have the ability to go land for Annex, Animate Mutavault to get the drain for 2, but that's his whole turn, doesn't get to hold up any kill spells, and maybe is at risk of Bob just having, doesn't even have land for Mason. That's
Yeah.
brutal.
It's brutal. I think that's what Garrick was trying to set up there. I think Garrick's hand's a little clunky and was hoping that Liliana could like maybe sponge up a little damage for him, try and get, that planes off the top or something and get the activation. But instead, we're going to go down to 12. Now, we know Bob's hand is Feed the Swarm, Monstrous Rage, unknown card. So that's a lot of damage here potentially because you can Monstrous Rage your own Heartfire hero and then Feed the Swarm it to deal damage to Garrick. I believe it says kill, not exile. I could be mistaken, but it looks like we're a mana short of having that be the line. So instead, we're going to kill the Culling Annex and attack for 3. Excuse me, 4 from Prowess.
Right. Now, Mason, I forget this. I might be asking a stupid question, but the Unholy Annex, the mana value is equal to the unlocked rooms, right?
Correct.
So because only the Annex was unlocked, that means Bob would take 3, not the full 8, because that would be
Correct.
a little rough.
Yes. If both doors were unlocked, he would take an 8. But Devin, Alondra, Saint of the Dusk, has hit the battlefield. This is a card players might not be used to. They haven't been playing Standard and playing Standard with some brews. This card is very strong. It's a 4/4 with lifelink and protection from Black Instants. And if your life total is higher than your starting, you get a nice big buff here. So sort of a mirror breaker here for Garrick and a card that's going to make combat very challenging for Bob.
Well, what's really funny about this is you mentioned protection from instants. Feed the Swarm, Mason, that's not an instant. So Garrick actually knew about, or I don't know, Garrick didn't know about the Feed the Swarm,
No,
but
he did.
He did. Oh, yeah, that was
Yeah,
in the hand. Okay, from the Thoughtseize, right. So Garrick actually, now sort of like maybe played the Annex as bait, or I guess didn't have any other options that turn, but actually, baited out the Feed the Swarm with the Annex, and now Bob doesn't have a clean answer than Elenda.
Yep. Bob also played the land for turn, so Garrick knows it's just a few cards that he didn't really know about. And we're trying to figure out, can we have lethal? If I like Monstrous Rage the mouse that you block with Elenda, does that lethal, or can I afford not to? We also have the Swift Spear in hand. If I like play Swift Spear and I attack with everything, and I Monstrous Rage, let's say you block Swift Spear, then my Monstrous Rage, is that bad for me? And we're running the numbers here, and I think it's a little shy of lethal. You could attack with just the Heartfire hero in order to kind of force the sort of trade. But it looks like what we're going to do is we're going to Fame, targeting one of the Heartfire heroes. That's going to trigger Valiant.
Yeah, that claim to fame should be exiled.
I think it's sort of a little sloppy moment here where I think Bob maybe thinks he has lethal. Yeah, he's trying to put it aside and just got messed up there.
Yeah. So right now, that the Heartfire hero is currently a 4/2. So if Garrick were to block the 4/2, the Rage would then make it at 7 power, right? So trample over for 3. That would mean Garrick would go to 3, gain 4 up to 7. Then you would take 3 more or actually 4 more because of the 2 prowess triggers from the Swiss Spear, and then the Heartfire hero trading would still be lethal. So yeah, I think, is there a way that Garrick can survive on blocks?
So if you block the Swift Spear and you Monstrous Rage the Heartfire hero without Valiant, you push 9 damage, and then there's 4 life gained from
what if you pump the Swift Spear?
If you pump the Swift Spear, you are going to trample over, I believe, for 1. And you are going to lose your Swift Spear as well, I believe, because prowess and everything does. You will actually keep your Swift Spear because it has the prowess trigger. Pardon me.
From the claim to fame, yep.
Exactly, yeah. So that's actually push an extra 2, which I believe does not put Garrick dead, because Garrick will gain 4 life, I believe, from the Elandra. I might be misremembering the exact text on that card.
3, 7. I think Garrick's going to 3 because the Swift Spear is initially 2, right? Prowess up to 3, roll up to 4, rage up to 6, 6 minus 4. Garrick's taking 2, but gaining 4. So up to 10, minus 2 is 8, and then 5 more damage from the 4/2 and the 1/1. So yeah, Garrick should be at 3.
Yep. Yeah, and that's well put there from Bob. I missed the prowess trigger on that, and that made that attack just... Garrick found the only way he didn't die, but even without dying, things are rough here. And unless you have something like Extinction Event to name ones, we're in a really bad spot, as you know, Bob has multiple lethal attackers.
Yeah, I think Eric still has a vanishing verse from a couple of turns ago, but that's realistically not enough here because you vanishing verse the hero that has a counter on it, and that still is 3 damage coming through. Maybe 2 kill spells. Well, the second Swiss Spear should maybe seal things up, even if there is no pump spell here from Bob. But we will see what Garrick does.
Yeah.
Maybe a block with Immutavault. So you
Yep.
block the 1/2 Swiss Spear and you exile the 2/2 hero.
Yeah, I think that has to probably be the line. Looks like we're blocking the two. Yeah, you have to block the
Oh,
two
you
pieces
chump
there.
there. Yep.
Yeah, because otherwise you're going to take the extra one from the monster roll. That does stay around. Vanishing Verse cleans it up. Bob's last card in hand is a land. Now, notably, it's a Blood Crypt, so we can shock it and pick up that Gigantha from our zone. And this is why Gigantha, I think, is actually such a real card here in Pioneer. This just comes up a lot as Shieldred comes down, but
Not quite enough.
doesn't gain any life, and all Bob has to do is turn the card sideways. Bob just says, "You're at 1, right?" Garrick's like, "Sounds about right." And we're going to see an attack here as we have a Ramen Up Runes as well. And we're going to see an extension of the hand there. Congratulations to Bob, moving on to 3 and 2. Garrick down to 2 and 3. But like we mentioned earlier, Devin, these players are not eliminated. They still have multiple losses to give. You need to get to 6 losses before you're out of our tournament, 8 to lock up the top 8. One step closer there. We're going to take a quick break, though, before we get into round number 6 of Pioneer here. We'll see you all very soon.